Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. Never in Bai Xiaochun's wildest dreams could he have imagined that he would run into this freakish heavenly Marquis Lu again. After all, the man had left a deep impression on him back in their original encounter. Bai Xiaochun would never forget that list of 100 crimes. He could still visualize the man's impassioned speech to the Grand Heaven Master, and how, after the tables had been turned, he had ended up fleeing to the Great Wall. Much later, the Great Wall fell, and Bai Xiaochun had stopped thinking about the matter, only to have him show up here and proclaim he had a list of 300 crimes. Back when the Grand Heaven Master sent me away from Arch-Emperor City, I was never able to track this guy down. What kind of luck does he have on his side? Fine, he survived the destruction of the Great Wall, and even the entire world. But how did he end up doing even better than Big Fatty Zhang, and becoming an important government official? And also, he's lost a lot of weight. His complexion is good, and he even looks younger. He looks even more dignified and imposing than he did in the past, handsomer even. Bai Xiaochun couldn't help but feel a bit jealous of this heavenly Marquis Lu. Not only was the man very lucky, he was clearly living a great life here in Saint Emperor City. When heavenly Marquis Lu noticed the expression on Bai Xiaochun's face, and saw all of the other important people in the palace hall looking at him with expressions of praise, his heart swelled with pride. Just as he was preparing to launch into all 300 of the crimes, Bai Xiaochun swished his sleeve, causing Gongsun Wanner and the other demigods he had captured to suddenly appear in front of him. Saint Emperor, this is the gift I prepared for you. Aware that he couldn't out-talk the glib heavenly Marquis Lu, he decided to simply jump straight ahead to the main point. As soon as Gongsun Wanner appeared, thousands of eyes came to focus on her, especially those in the front of the crowd, who were the other celestials of similar rank to Jiu Tianjun. Even the Saint Emperor was so interested in Gongsun Wanner that he forgot all about heavenly Marquis Lu. Seeing what had happened, heavenly Marquis Lu rubbed his nose awkwardly and then melted back into the crowd. Fine, you've slipped through my fingers again, Bai Xiaochun. Well done. But sooner or later I'll list out all 1,000 of the crimes I have prepared. Gongsun Wanner looked around calmly at the crowd, and then gave a curtsying bow to the Saint Emperor. However, she didn't say anything. As a celestial from the Vile Emperor dynasty, she would show respect for other powerful and important people, but that was it. She was confident that she would not be harmed in the Saint Emperor dynasty. In contrast, looks of despair could be seen on the faces of the trembling demigods. The pressure from the Celestials and the Saint Emperor left them feeling like they might collapse. A moment passed, and then the Saint Emperor began to laugh loudly. He rose from his throne, a look of excitement on his face. After all, this was the most impressive gift anyone had offered to him in the history of the Saint Emperor dynasty. He wouldn't kill Gongsun Wanner, but considering that she was a Celestial, he would be able to trade her for significant land concessions. Considering that there were certain prefectures which were the source of much friction between the two dynasties, this was a great opportunity. Best of all, it wouldn't violate any of his agreements with the Vile Emperor. After all, this gift had been sent to him, not sought out. Even if the Vile Emperor wanted to seek revenge, he couldn't blame the Saint Emperor for any of it. Good, great, excellent. Laughing heartily, the Saint Emperor looked over at Bai Xiaochun and the Giant Ghost King at the other end of the square. Giant Ghost, step forward to hear my decree. Eyes sparkling, the Giant Ghost King stepped forward, and then clasped hands to the Saint Emperor. Henceforth, Giant Ghost shall be the preceptor of Godsifter Prefecture, and shall be given control of the Joss Flame of all the living beings there. In the eternal immortal domains, a prefecture was roughly the same size as the entire Heavenspan realm. As the preceptor of a Godsifter Prefecture, the Giant Ghost King's words would be law. Such a reward was very fitting for someone of the Giant Ghost King's status, and he was very pleased with it. In fact, the main thing he had hoped to acquire in this venture was a proper location to begin harboring people from the Heavenspan realm. Clasping hands, the Giant Ghost King bowed excitedly. Thank you, Saint Emperor. When he rose from his bow, he somehow seemed different from before. As of this moment, he now had a foundation in the Eternal Lands. He was no longer a roving rogue cultivator, and would no longer be in a constant state of deadly crisis. It was exactly as he had discussed at the outset with Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun was also very excited. When he saw that the Giant Ghost King had been given an entire prefecture, he couldn't help but wonder what his own reward would be, considering the greater nature of his role in the events. With that, the Saint Emperor looked at Bai Xiaochun, eyes flickering slightly as he said, "Bai Xiaochun, hear my decree." Bai Xiaochun put an extremely respectful expression onto his face. He knew when to bow his head at the proper time, and this was one of them. It was no loss of face to do so when reaching one's goal. Bai Xiaochun has performed a great service. He is someone of extremely high standing from the Heavenspan realm, a person of such renown and prestige that none can compare to him. Henceforth, Bai Xiaochun shall be conferred with the title Duke Heavenspan. In the Saint Emperor dynasty, only celestials may claim the title of king. Under the kings are the dukes. Therefore, Duke Heavenspan shall be the leader of many people, second only to a king. Bequeath him with a blessed land within Saint Emperor city, a single dragonfish from the celestial pond, a ducal robe, and a 7-colored, jeweled belt. As the Saint Emperor's words echoed out, very serious expressions could be seen on the faces of the surrounding aristocracy. It was a very impressive reward. Not only was Bai Xiaochun being named Duke Heavenspan, he was also being given a blessed land, as well as a dragonfish. The ducal robe was a magical item, and the 7-colored belt would ensure that he didn't feel any pressure from the spirit automaton that controlled the imperial palace. All of it seemed very impressive, and yet in the end, it was an empty reward. The truth was that Bai Xiaochun really was in a very unique position. The Saint Emperor had seen fit to give the giant Ghost King an entire prefecture, but that wasn't a possibility with Bai Xiaochun. The Saint Emperor didn't want to give the people of Heavenspan an actual location to build a power base. His goal was to absorb the Heavenspan cultivators into the Saint Emperor dynasty. Obviously, it wouldn't make sense to give Bai Xiaochun, the arch-ancestor, any substantial level of power. He wanted Bai Xiaochun to stay in Saint Emperor City and not cause any trouble. At best, he could be a figurehead. Later on, after all of the people of Heavenspan had been successfully absorbed into the Saint Emperor dynasty, Bai Xiaochun's usefulness would end, and he could be disposed of if necessary. The truth was that, even if Bai Xiaochun hadn't brought his blood tribute, his reward would have been the same. Although the Saint Emperor was pleased that Ghost Mother had been brought to him, inside he was really just sighing in regret. After all, everyone would be paying close attention to what happened as a result, including the officials in his own dynasty, as well as people from the Vile Emperor dynasty. Considering the enormous value of the gift, the Saint Emperor had to offer some sort of reward. And that was why he had given a prefecture and preceptorship to the giant Ghost King. Normally speaking, he would never have given the people of Heavenspan even the slightest chance to do things on their own. I'll just wait until the time is right and come up with an excuse to strip this giant ghost of his title. Although the Saint Emperor was chuckling coldly in his heart, his gaze when he looked at Bai Xiaochun was one of deep warmth. This is your first time in Saint Emperor City, Duke Heavenspan. I'm sure it will take you a bit of time to settle in. You don't need to worry for a moment about the Heavenspan realm or your people. I'll take care of everything. Surely you're tired from all the travel, Duke Heavenspan, so please feel free to go take a rest. From now on, you can focus peacefully on your cultivation. I'm sure you'll achieve a breakthrough soon. Once you're a celestial, I'll be more than happy to give you the title of king. As the Saint Emperor spoke, cold gleams could be seen in the somber faces of the crowd. By this point, even Bai Xiaochun could tell that the reward he was being given was mostly a sham. Of course, he and the giant Ghost King had conferred with each other along the way, and had guessed that something like this might happen. And in the end, despite their faint hope, it turned out that the Saint Emperor's plans for them weren't too different than the Vile Emperor's. He just went about things differently. I bet that without the blood tribute, though, the giant Ghost King would not have been given a prefecture. As of now, Bai Xiaochun was absolutely convinced these two emperors were weasels from the same nest. One is vicious, the other is a hypocrite, he thought, smiling faintly. Although he was a bit disappointed, he wasn't too surprised. After all, there was one thing the Saint Emperor had said that was absolutely correct. I'm definitely going to achieve a cultivation breakthrough soon. He clasped hands and bowed to the Saint Emperor, and was just about to say his farewells to the giant Ghost King, when all of a sudden, Heavenly Marquis Lu shouted, "Your Majesty the Saint Emperor, you absolutely must not allow Bai Xiaochun to remain within Saint Emperor City. It will put us all in grave danger." From the tightness of Heavenly Marquis Lu's voice, he seemed extremely nervous. His words almost came out as a scream. In response, the thousands of court officials looked over at him with frowns on their faces. Bai Xiaochun stopped in place and blinked a few times. As for the giant Ghost King, his eyes shone with anticipation. So, the fellow finally speaks some truth. Actually, the giant Ghost King hoped that Heavenly Marquis Lu would convince the Saint Emperor to change his mind. If Bai Xiaochun were able to avoid being confined in Saint Emperor City, it would be much more beneficial to their cause. For the first time, Bai Xiaochun wasn't very annoyed by Heavenly Marquis Lu, and actually looked forward to what he was about to say. He was even secretly cheering him on. Although the Saint Emperor wasn't very pleased, he masked such feelings and turned his warm gaze onto Heavenly Marquis Lu. "My dear Minister Lu, what exactly do you mean?" Having received the nod of approval from the Saint Emperor, Heavenly Marquis Lu bowed excitedly, and then spoke out in a much louder voice. "Your Majesty, you have no idea the kinds of things this Bai Xiaochun did in the Heavenspan realm. Sir, it didn't matter where he went, he would always cause a massive disaster, and wreak the cruelest of torments upon the people there. He toyed with the Spirit Stream sect, toyed with the Bloodstream sect, and toyed with the River-defying sect to no end. Later, he ended up in the Wildlands, where he shook down clans, stole wives, and accumulated a list of 100 major crimes. Afterward, he nearly destroyed the entire Nine Heavens Cloud Lightning sect." Voices of discontent could be heard everywhere. Men and gods alike were outraged. Heavenly Marquis Lu was clearly very worked up, and actually had a lot more to say. But by this point, the gathered officials had begun to laugh openly. Although they didn't believe Heavenly Marquis Lu to be lying, they most certainly assumed that he was exaggerating. Besides, although Bai Xiaochun had a quasi-celestial cultivation base, he came from a very small world. In sharp contrast, Saint Emperor City was the capital city of an entire dynasty. There were multiple celestials here, as well as the Saint Emperor himself. Even if Bai Xiaochun were more powerful than he actually was, they didn't see how anything he could do would possibly cause any major problems. The Saint Emperor gave a hollow chuckle. He felt the same as everyone else. If you threw a monkey into a little garden with no other animals in it, then the monkey would definitely seem tough. But throw that same monkey into a lion's den, and the monkey would have a very different fate. Waving his hand to interrupt Heavenly Marquis Lu, he rose to his feet, indicating that court was adjourned. Both the Giant Ghost King and Bai Xiaochun were very disappointed. To some extent, Bai Xiaochun was also nervous. He knew that he had the strange ability to cause major disasters, even when he didn't want to. Therefore, he decided that the best thing to do would be to make sure he had some insurance. Rushing forward, he called out, "Your Majesty, wait a moment." The Saint Emperor stopped in place and turned to look at him, as did all of the other court officials. "Your Majesty," he said cautiously, "what Lu Yang just said is actually true. To be honest, I'm a bit worried that I might break some rules in the Saint Emperor dynasty. In fact, if I, Duke Heavenspan, accidentally violate some rules, what would the punishment be?" The Saint Emperor's eyes narrowed as he looked back and forth between Bai Xiaochun and Heavenly Marquis Lu, trying to decide if they were working together. From the look of things, both of them were trying to come up with an excuse to get Bai Xiaochun out of Saint Emperor City. As a duke who has performed meritorious service, as long as you don't betray the nation, you will not be punished for any action. Inside, the Saint Emperor was chuckling coldly. Considering how important Bai Xiaochun was in controlling the people of Heavenspan, there was no way he would simply let him leave. Bai Xiaochun was very pleased with the answer he had just been given, but didn't let it show on his face. Frowning and sighing, he left with the Giant Ghost King. As everyone departed, Heavenly Marquis Lu stood there, crestfallen. As far as he was concerned, the Saint Emperor had just led the wolf right into the henhouse. In the coming days, Saint Emperor City would likely descend into tragedy, at least until the drums and gongs were broken out, and the plague god Bai Xiaochun was driven away. "Don't say I didn't warn you," he sighed, bemoaning the state of the universe, and pitying the fate of mankind. Court was adjourned, and the Saint Emperor had bestowed the rewards. Before Bai Xiaochun left, the two old men who had been standing at the front of the hall approached him. One of them gave him a jade slip which was essentially a key to the blessed land he had been given. The other was a colorful belt which would ensure that he didn't feel any pressure from the spirit automaton of the world treasure that was the imperial palace. He was also given a ducal robe of the finest quality, a magical item with an impressive aura. Lastly, he was given a dragonfish. The dragonfish was fully 3 meters long, and was still alive. It had been bound up so that it couldn't move, and yet its sharp teeth and glaring eyes seemed particularly ferocious. Bai Xiaochun looked over the rewards and sighed. "This Saint Emperor is so stingy. I guess the robe, immortals cave, and belt are okay, but what did he give me a fish for?" Shaking his head, he used the jade slip to go find his blessed land, taking the Giant Ghost King with him. It was located on a lotus leaf that had plenty of buildings on it. His blessed land was right in the middle, in a relatively tranquil and quiet locale. Although it was called a blessed land, it was actually just a mansion residence. On the upside, the spiritual power of heaven and earth was strong in the area. There were beautiful ornamental rocks, and lovely buildings built in a very impressive and imposing style. Bai Xiaochun was happy with the residence. Although it was relatively empty and unfamiliar, he didn't mind, and therefore just sat down to meditate and familiarize himself with the spiritual energy of heaven and earth here. As for the giant ghost king, he looked around briefly and then left. The giant ghost king and Bai Xiaochun were very different in some ways. For example, back in the town he had ended up in, Bai Xiaochun never got familiar with anybody. Some of it had to do with the depression he had been in, but some of it was his personality. In contrast, the giant ghost king had made friends quickly. From that, it was possible to see how good the giant ghost king was at expanding his network. In fact, he could put Xu Baosai to shame. And that was exactly what he planned to do here. Even as he made preparations to go to Godsifter Prefecture, he made inquiries and gathered information. Before long, the moon hung high in the sky, and Bai Xiaochun awoke from his meditative trance. After looking up into the sky, and then glancing around at the unfamiliar buildings, he realized that he had truly taken his first major step in the eternal immortal domains. Sighing, he began to think of many familiar faces. Uncle Li, Bruiser, Patriarch Spirit Stream, Song Junwan, Mistress Red Dust, Master God Diviner, Xu Baosai. In the end he sighed, thinking about one final name. Du Lingfei. Bai Xiaochun wasn't even sure if Du Lingfei was still alive. Back in the final moments, Taoist Heavenspan had claimed that she was. But then the world was destroyed. And the immortal domains were vast and filled with countless people. How could he possibly find her in such an environment? What I need to do now is work hard on my cultivation and break through to the celestial realm. In terms of cultivation, I need medicinal pills and the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. I guess I need to familiarize myself with what type of cultivation resources are available in the eternal immortal domains. As he settled his thoughts, his eyes began to shine with both anticipation and focus. As the night deepened, the giant ghost king returned, looking very excited. The fish, that dragonfish. Surprised, Bai Xiaochun looked over at the dragonfish, which was off to the side, still flipping and flopping a bit. From the look in the giant ghost king's eyes, it was like some sort of precious treasure. Xiaochun, that's no ordinary fish. The Saint Emperor really wasn't holding back at all. Heavenly dragonfish are native only to this heavenly pond. They drink heavenly pond water, and thus naturally absorb the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. They are also fed with all sorts of precious materials. They're considered the personal property of the Saint Emperor. Any cultivator of the celestial level or lower who eats a heavenly dragonfish will experience a major cultivation base boost. As much as from an immortal pill. Immortal pill, Bai Xiaochun said, his eyes shining. He had just been wondering about where to get the spiritual energy he needed to work on his cultivation. And thus, he and the giant ghost king went about roasting the fish. As it turned a lovely golden brown color, a wonderful aroma filled the air. Bai Xiaochun and the giant ghost king salivated as they waited for it to finish cooking. And then, they began to eat. When he was finished, Bai Xiaochun licked his lips in complete satisfaction and said, "Delicious. Tastes just like spirit tail chicken." Bai Xiaochun suddenly realized that he missed spirit tail chickens, and yet, the fact that he had found something similar to them in the eternal lands was a wonderful thing. The giant ghost king smacked his lips, and then eyed a fish bone for a moment before tossing it into his mouth and crunching it to bits. He then prepared to speak, but before he could, he shivered, and a searing heat rose up inside of him that caused white mist to build up in the area. "An immortal fish," he exclaimed. He quickly settled down cross-legged to begin doing breathing exercises. After the giant ghost king experienced such success, Bai Xiaochun waited for a long moment to see if something similar would happen with himself. However, no heat appeared inside of him. What's going on? It worked for the giant ghost king. Why not me? Then he looked around, and realized that there were a lot of bones around that they hadn't eaten. After randomly picking up a few, he crunched them up in his mouth and swallowed them, which was exactly when the warm current began to flow through him. Delighted, he closed his eyes. Soon, the warmth turned into something like a huge wave that pushed his Live Forever Codex further toward completion. Suppressing his excitement, he focused on the energy in his body. Time passed. Soon, roughly 6 hours had gone by since Bai Xiaochun and the giant ghost king began meditating. At that point, the giant ghost king opened his eyes, threw his head back and laughed uproariously. In that short 6 hours, the giant ghost king had made significant progress toward the late demigod realm. "It's too bad we only had one," he said. If I could eat fish like that more often, I could reach the Great Circle in no time. At that point, Bai Xiaochun also opened his eyes, and they glittered with bright light. Although he hadn't made as much progress as the giant Ghost King, that was because he was already further past him in general. Even still, the little bit of progress he had experienced was very exciting. If he wanted to break through to become a celestial, then he needed to reach the Great Circle of the Live Forever Codex. Unfortunately, he was still some distance away from that level. And unfortunately, the Live Forever Codex differed from the Undying Codex in that he had not actually personally cultivated it. It had been consecrated upon him. Although he had developed the divine abilities of the technique all the way to creating his Live Forever lamp, the truth was that he still didn't really understand how to actually cultivate the technique. After the Gravekeeper consecrated him, he came to the eternal immortal domains and achieved a bit of progress. But it was slow to the point of being almost nothing. At the moment, his Live Forever Codex had reached the point where it was holding him back. He was basically at a major bottleneck. Based on what he could tell, if he practiced ordinary cultivation with the spiritual energy in Saint Emperor City, then he couldn't achieve in 10 years or more what he had just achieved by eating half of a heavenly dragonfish. Considering that, it was almost impossible to calculate how long it would take him to break out of the demigod realm by ordinary cultivation alone. His original plan had been to acquire some special medicinal pills or something similar. But now, looking around at the handful of fish bones that were left over, he realized that a new path had just been opened up. One fish is worth at least 15 years of cultivation. All of a sudden, Bai Xiaochun's eyes began to shine as brightly as a mouse that hadn't eaten for several years. If I could get enough of those fish, breaking through this bottleneck would be super easy. I could become a celestial very soon. He was already getting very excited. For one thing, he would have much more longevity and life force after becoming a celestial, and for another, he would have his Deoseed, which meant he could be resurrected if he died. All of a sudden, he had the desire to reach the absolute pinnacle of this strange new world he was in. And it all came down to the heavenly dragonfish. I need fish. He immediately began to look around and grab up all fish bones he could see. However, the giant Ghost King seemed to have come to the same conclusion as him, and lunged to interfere. Hey, giant Ghost King, the Saint Emperor gave me this fish as a reward. Don't you dare fight me over it. Bai Xiaochun's eyes widened into a glare. Like hell. I'm your father-in-law, fool. Haven't you heard of filial piety? At this point, Bai Xiaochun furiously resorted to a trump card. This is one of my leftovers. I actually licked it already. Oh yeah? Well, I licked all the other ones you already ate. We're related anyway, so it doesn't matter. Not willing to be outdone, the giant Ghost King leaned forward and spat toward the fish bones on the ground. Perhaps it was because of some divine ability that he cultivated, but that one bit of spittle somehow managed to spread out and cover all of the bones. Bai Xiaochun stood there, stunned at the giant Ghost King's despicable and yet devastating tactics. Although he had to admit that the man was definitely thicker-skinned and a much better schemer than himself, that didn't explain how he was able to spit out so much saliva in one shot. As he stood there hesitating, the giant Ghost King waved his sleeve, collecting all of the fish bones up and depositing them into his bag of holding. With that, he smiled complacently. You're too inexperienced to fight with me, kid. With that, he laughed heartily. Dumbfounded, Bai Xiaochun sighed and was about to say something when both he and the giant Ghost King realized that someone was approaching the Blessed Land. A moment later, they heard someone speaking outside. Duke Heavenspan, it's Chen Su, here for a visit. This was the first official visit Bai Xiaochun had received in Saint Emperor City, and shockingly, the visitor was a celestial. Not only was Bai Xiaochun curious to see who it was, he also didn't want to cause any offenses, so he hurried over, waving his hand to open the main gate. Revealed outside was an old man with gray hair. He wore a long, blue robe, and bore the demeanor of a transcendent being. Smiling faintly, he clasped hands in formal greeting. I was wondering why the birds were singing so happily earlier. Bai Xiaochun said, it was because an honored guest was on his way. I never imagined it would be you, fellow Taoist Chen. Please, come in. Bai Xiaochun's broad smile and clearly spoken words made him seem completely different than he had moments ago, struggling with the giant Ghost King over fish bones. Chen Su laughed heartily at Bai Xiaochun's pleasing words. Nodding, he stepped into the Blessed Land. The giant Ghost King was also curious about this visitor. Neither he nor Bai Xiaochun were cultivators of the Saint Emperor dynasty, and were considered foreigners. Although they both had official government positions, based on the information he had gathered earlier, he knew that most of the other government officials viewed them with a certain measure of contempt. And yet, almost overnight, someone had come to pay their respects. Furthermore, Chen Su was one of the 4 kings of the Saint Emperor dynasty, someone with a rank similar to Jiu Tianjun. Shocked, the giant ghost king quickly clasped hands in a greeting of his own. Chen Su nodded at the giant ghost king, but then ignored him. After looking around the courtyard, he made some small talk with Bai Xiaochun, until finally clearing his throat. Fellow Taoist Bai, where is the heavenly dragonfish that His Majesty rewarded you with? Heavenly dragonfish? Bai Xiaochun had been curious about the nature of the visit, so when Chen Su brought up the heavenly dragonfish, he was a bit taken aback. Yes, the heavenly dragonfish, Chen Su replied warmly. If you'd be willing to part with it, fellow Taoist Bai, I'd love to take it in trade. Chen Su, despite being a celestial, actually had no heavenly dragonfish. After all, they were considered the personal property of the Saint Emperor, and were rarely given out as rewards. In fact, throughout all history, only a few hundred had ever been distributed. Each one was considered beyond priceless, and they were commonly referred to as national treasures, which was no exaggeration. In the Vile Emperor dynasty, people would pay astronomical prices to acquire even one. One of the main reasons for that was that their blood could be used as an immortal ingredient to concoct immortal pills. Chen Su was convinced that his proposal would not be rejected. Bai Xiaochun was a newcomer to the Saint Emperor dynasty, and wouldn't want to offend a celestial over a fish. Bai Xiaochun hesitated for a moment, then said, sorry, fellow Taoist Chen, you're a bit late. I ate it already. When Chen Su heard Bai Xiaochun's response, his eyes nearly popped out of his skull. Did you just say, you ate it? Bai Xiaochun blinked a few times and then nodded. Yep, ate it. As far as Chen Su was concerned, Bai Xiaochun was obviously making up excuses. Voice cold, he said, come on, fellow Taoist Bai. Don't treat me like I'm 3 years old or something. If you don't wish to part with it, just say so directly. Heavenly dragonfish are national treasures, and precious beyond imagination. Nobody who acquired one would ever possibly eat it. The best thing to do is keep it in a pond and extract its blood occasionally. With that, he flicked his sleeve as if to leave. At this point, Bai Xiaochun sighed and gave the giant ghost king a look. The giant ghost king, despite not really wanting to, produced some fish bones from his bag of holding. See these fish bones, fellow Taoist Chen. When Chen Su looked back and saw the bones, his eyes went wide. When he opened his mouth to speak, the fish bones, and the aura of a heavenly dragonfish coming from them, caused Chen Su's heart to seize, and his mind to spin. As a celestial in the Saint Emperor dynasty, he had seen heavenly dragonfish given out as rewards before. Whenever it happened, the recipients would keep them in ponds and take good care of them. This was his first time hearing of someone doing something so shocking as eating a national treasure. In fact, he almost couldn't process it mentally. After staring blankly at the fish bones for a moment, he shook his head and sighed. What a reckless waste. Unsure of exactly how he felt, he slowly left the blessed land. After he was gone, Bai Xiaochun and the giant ghost king looked at each other in shock. It's just a fish, right? The giant ghost king said. These Saint Emperor dynasty people are real weirdos. The truth was that he was actually feeling a bit guilty at having gathered incomplete information the night before. Clearing his throat, he looked up into the evening sky. Well, Xiaochun, it's actually a long way to Godsifter Prefecture. I really need to get going. Who knows when we'll meet again? He sighed. The two of them had accomplished a lot since their initial reunion in the Vile Emperor dynasty, and as he thought back, he realized that there had been many twists and turns in their journey. The upside was that he now had a firm foundation, and his own path to tread. Bai Xiaochun was feeling a bit emotional as well as he escorted the giant ghost king all the way to the teleportation portal. After the giant ghost king faded away, Bai Xiaochun sighed, and then turned to head back to his blessed land. With the giant ghost king gone, I'm all alone now. I guess it's time to start working hard on my cultivation base breakthrough. A glint of determination could be seen in his eyes as he proceeded along. There were other pedestrians, mostly cultivators, although the occasional mortal could also be seen. And yet, even the mortals seemed to have arrogance baked into them all the way down to their bones. Everyone in the capital city seemed to have a very high impression of themselves, and the truth was that Bai Xiaochun didn't mind that. As he walked along, he looked around at the buildings, and thought about how Saint Emperor City rested on enormous lotus leaves. It all made him sigh. And to think that it's all built on top of a huge mountain and a heavenly pond. At one point, his path took him toward the very edge of the lotus leaf, where he took the opportunity to look over at the water below. Heavenly dragonfish swam there, and would occasionally leap up out of the water, their golden scales glistening in the sunlight and making them look particularly beautiful. Quite a few people were in the area. Although the locals were used to heavenly dragonfish, they were still such an amazing sight that people would come to scenic spots like this to look at them. And of course, passing visitors would always come to do the same thing. These are the national treasures of the Saint Emperor dynasty, heavenly dragonfish. These heavenly dragonfish are the most beautiful spirit creatures I've ever seen in my entire life. If the Saint Emperor gave one to me as a gift, I would take care of it in my home forever. What an honor to my ancestors that would be. Many such expressions of praise could be heard. However, as Bai Xiaochun stood there in the crowd, he was thinking something very different. His mind was occupied with thoughts of how delicious the heavenly dragonfish were, and how beneficial they were to his cultivation base. He couldn't help but lick his lips. Considering the level of his cultivation base, it was easy for him to get a general idea of how many fish there were in the heavenly pond, and there were a lot. Even as he pondered if it might be possible to catch one, a visiting cultivator in the crowd turned to a friend and asked, considering that the heavenly dragonfish are precious national treasures, what would happen if one of them went missing? When Bai Xiaochun heard that, his eyes glittered. Missing? Laughter rippled through the crowd, causing the cultivator who had asked the question to flush in embarrassment. Standing nearby was an old man with a nascent soul cultivation base, a person who had clearly lived in Saint Emperor City for many years. Looking naturally pompous, he provided an answer. All of the heavenly dragonfish here are the personal property of His Majesty the Saint Emperor. They're all branded with his mark. Who would possibly dare to try to steal one? It would never happen, trust me. If someone did steal a fish, they would meet a horrific and grisly fate. In fact, forget stealing. It's forbidden to do anything that would even come close to harming a heavenly dragonfish. In response to the old man's explanation, the visiting cultivator nodded vigorously. As for Bai Xiaochun, he frowned, slightly frustrated by what he was hearing. When the old man realized that he was now the center of attention, he proudly continued, of course, His Majesty the Saint Emperor is generous and benevolent, and is not the type to become overly attached to his personal property. Furthermore, he pays close attention to matters regarding destiny. Therefore, he made a proclamation long ago stating that, in addition to acquiring heavenly dragonfish as a personal gift from him, anyone can take them as long as they do so by fishing. Fishing? Blurted one of the other nearby cultivators. That's right, fishing. With a hook and line. Magic isn't allowed, only ordinary fishing techniques. The old man cleared his throat before continuing. Dragonfish are intelligent, and if you are connected to one by destiny, it will allow you to hook it and even eat it. Stroking his beard, the old man pointed to another location at the edge of the lotus leaf, where it was just possible to see someone seated in meditation, but with a fishing pole in his hand. Look, over there. That's Preceptor Sideep. He's been fishing in that exact same spot for over 100 years. He hasn't changed fishing spots by even an inch. I guess it just goes to show that he isn't connected by destiny to any of the dragonfish. Most of the people in the crowd actually knew all of these things already, and were clearly very proud of them. Eventually, the visiting cultivator offered profound thanks, and the crowd dispersed. Bai Xiaochun remained behind, peering down at the heavenly dragonfish, and occasionally looking at the demigod, who had been sitting there fishing for over 100 years. This Saint Emperor really is stuck up, he thought, rubbing his chin. Although the Saint Emperor's decree seemed like an expression of benevolence, the truth was that it was close to impossible to hook a dragonfish. One would probably be lucky to catch one after fishing for a few decades. After all, they were intelligent, and were used to eating precious materials of heaven and earth, making them almost like immortal creatures. According to the Saint Emperor's decree, anyone who was connected by destiny to a fish could eat it, except that was not something that would happen for most ordinary cultivators. The more Bai Xiaochun thought about it, the more obvious it was. And likely, there were other powerful experts in the Saint Emperor dynasty who would realize that such matters of destiny made the prospect of catching a dragonfish basically impossible. Few people could have the raw determination of Preceptor Sideep. Bai Xiaochun was already starting to feel a bit let down. He really wanted to eat some heavenly dragonfish, but it seemed like getting his hands on one would be too difficult. After thinking about the matter for a while, he decided that it was possible he was thinking too deeply into the subject. Therefore, he went and bought some fishing gear and found a good place to try his hand at it. After several failures, he sighed and gave up. There's no way you can hook one of those fish. The fish in the water would simply pass by his line. Sometimes they would look up at him, and although he couldn't be sure, he was fairly convinced that they were mocking him. How dare some fish make fun of me, he thought angrily, glaring down into the water as fiercely as he could. However, he soon shivered in defeat. He usually won staring contests, but now, the mocking gazes of the heavenly dragonfish had him scowling on the verge of tears. Eventually he stomped away from the water's edge. Complete and utter bullying, he thought bitterly. However, he was out of options. Throwing his fishing pole down, he returned to his immortals' cave. A few days later, an emissary came from the vile Emperor dynasty to discuss the matter of Ghost Mother with the Saint Emperor. In the end, 3 prefectures were ceded to the Saint Emperor dynasty to get her back. By the time Bai Xiaochun heard about it, the bone lizard battleship was flying off into the distance. He just barely made out Gongsun Wan'er on deck, toward whom he clasped hands and bowed, wishing her well after she got back to the vile Emperor dynasty. After all, the person returning to the vile Emperor was both Ghost Mother and, not Ghost Mother. Everyone in the Saint Emperor dynasty was both proud and elated with how Ghost Mother was traded away. After all, the vile Emperor had given up 3 prefectures to seal the deal, prefectures which had belonged to the Saint Emperor dynasty to begin with, but had been lost over the years of minor conflict between the 2 dynasties. To cultivators who were not in the know, it might seem like a major victory in the overarching conflict between the dynasties. But the powerful and influential individuals in the Saint Emperor dynasty, and of course the Saint Emperor himself, knew that the 3 prefectures in question had been reduced to virtual wastelands over the course of the occupation. To the vile Emperor dynasty, they were now of little value or interest. But to the Saint Emperor dynasty, anything was better than nothing. Furthermore, the Saint Emperor knew that if he pushed things too far, the vile Emperor could very well just abandon Ghost Mother and refuse to offer any concessions at all. If that happened, then the onus would be cast on the Saint Emperor dynasty for being greedy, and would ensure that not even the vile Emperor would take blame from his subordinates. After all factors were considered, an agreement was reached that appeased both sides, and prevented greater issues from arising. None of it had much to do with Bai Xiaochun. In fact, neither side mentioned him at all during the negotiations. Although he had played a critical role within the entire affair, it was in the interests of both parties to just pretend as if he hadn't. Bai Xiaochun didn't care about that. At the moment, he was sitting in his blessed land, scowling on the verge of tears, 1,000 thoughts running through his head as he contemplated the issue of the heavenly dragonfish. In an attempt to stop thinking about them, he took some time to make inquiries regarding pill concocting in Saint Emperor City. What he came to find was that the techniques used here were in the same vein as those in the Heavenspan realm. However, there were also some major differences that made the concocting process very difficult. They were also very expensive to produce. In terms of medicinal pills that were appropriate for demigods, not only were they rare, they were ridiculously overpriced. Another problem was that Bai Xiaochun didn't exactly have a huge savings built up. Worse, although he had some medicinal plants, he had no pill formulas, and creating new formulas from scratch was a very grueling and expensive process. Unless he could think of some ways to earn a lot of spirit stones, he would definitely go broke trying to rely on medicinal pills. The best way to save money would be to use heavenly dragonfish. It was with bloodshot eyes that he stared in the direction of the heavenly pond, which seemed the only viable path to further his cultivation. Gritting his teeth, he said, "I'm not gonna just give in. Considering those fish dared to despise me, I'm definitely going to teach them a lesson." Grabbing his fishing pole, he hurried over to the edge of the lotus leaf. Picking a different area than last time, he spent a few days fishing, but in the end, sighed and gave up again. The fish really were like immortal beings. No matter which fishing spot he picked, they would just swim right past his line, and would often gaze at him with contemptuous looks in their eyes. Several days passed in which Bai Xiaochun was eyed disdainfully by thousands of individual fish. Eventually, his world began to grow dark. At the same time, people noticed what he was doing, and gossip began to spread. Duke Heavenspan is fishing? Well, he is a barbarian foreigner after all. Back when he was talking himself up at court, he really sounded like some amazing figure. But it turns out he's just a moron who doesn't understand the true meaning of the Saint Emperor's rule about the heavenly dragonfish. I'll tell you what, if that guy manages to catch a fish, I'll change my surname to match his. Seems the lotus leaves of Saint Emperor City have gained another obsessed fool like Preceptor Seedeep. Not a single kind word could be heard among the aristocracy. Everyone was making fun of Bai Xiaochun. After all, they looked down on the people of Heavenspan to begin with, just like Gu Tianjun did. As far as they were concerned, the only thing the people of Heavenspan were good for was to be servants. At best, the Saint Emperor dynasty would pity them and take them in for charity's sake. The Saint Emperor eventually heard what was happening, and shook his head. "It doesn't matter," he said with a smile. "If Duke Heavenspan just spends his time fishing, that will save me a lot of effort down the road." The only person who reacted differently was Lu Yang. When he heard about the matter, he was initially shocked, but then he penned a formal request to the Saint Emperor, in which he begged him to prohibit Bai Xiaochun from fishing. Sadly for him, the fact that he was from the Heavenspan realm ensured that everybody ignored him. The Saint Emperor merely looked at the written request and then tossed it to the side. Whether it was the fish in the pond or the officials in the city, they all looked at Bai Xiaochun with contempt. Eventually, it reached the point where he couldn't take it anymore. Fudge. Fine, screw this fishing business. As he glared at the scornful fish, a vicious smile suddenly played out on his face. After sending some divine sense out to make sure that no one was watching him, he produced a fantasy pill from his bag of holding and threw it into the heavenly pond. No one noticed, and the pill melted as soon as it hit the water. Within moments, it was absorbed by the nearby fish. Giving them a final look, Bai Xiaochun snorted coldly and left. Over the course of the following days, he would frequently go to the edge of the lotus leaf and surreptitiously toss some fantasy pills into the water. In order to avoid attracting notice, he was careful to only throw 2 or 3 pills in each time, and occasionally just one. He knew that some things could only be accomplished over time and required patience. And thus, more than half a month slipped by. Gradually, more and more of the heavenly dragonfish began to react to the fantasy pill. Eventually, it reached the point where all Bai Xiaochun had to do was walk up to the water, and a large group of them would swim over in the hopes of getting some of the water affected by the fantasy pills. 2 things worked to his advantage. The first was that it was common for heavenly dragonfish to congregate near someone who was fishing, and cast contemptuous glances at them. The second was that Bai Xiaochun made sure to find remote locations where he was less likely to attract any attention. To play things extra safe, he also pretended to be fishing as he went about his work. As the days went by and he watched the heavenly dragonfish gobble up his pills, his heart swelled with more pride than ever. Measly heavenly dragonfish, I'll show you how awesome Lord Bai is. Everybody who gets a taste of my fantasy pills gets addicted. I refuse to believe that you will be any exception. Bai Xiaochun was feeling very proud and confident in his pills. He was absolutely sure that the fish in the pond were developing a dependency on fantasy pills. Eventually, he stopped throwing the pills in the pond, and waited for the heavenly dragonfish to begin showing signs of withdrawal. One day as he was strolling near the edge of the lotus leaf, he saw a crowd forming, and people crying out in alarm. Heavens! The heavenly dragonfish are so smart. Look, guys, that one knows how to go fishing. Bai Xiaochun hurried over and saw one particular heavenly dragonfish with a long string of seaweed in its mouth, acting just like a cultivator holding a fishing pole. Excited, he realized that the crucial moment had arrived. Excitement surging, he pulled out his fishing rod, which he had already prepared for this very moment by coating the hook with the aura of a fantasy pill. Looking around, he realized that he was very close to Preceptor Didnt, who was sitting there as motionless as usual. Hefting his fishing pole, he hurried over and sat down next to him, then prepared to cast his line. The first thing Preceptor Didnt did was frown. He knew that Bai Xiaochun was Duke Heavenspan, and yet, was as contemptuous of the people of Heavenspan as everyone else in the city. Clearly, he wasn't happy that Duke Heavenspan had come to his fishing spot to fish without first asking permission. Even worse was that Bai Xiaochun's fishing rod looked completely ordinary in nature. Preceptor Didnt's was made from soft jade, making it incredibly flexible. It was also filled with spiritual energy. To top everything off, the look of anticipation on Bai Xiaochun's face was very annoying. As a demigod expert of the same age as Gu Tianjun, and someone who had even deigned to give advice to the younger Chen Su, Preceptor Didnt was profoundly qualified in all respects. Well met, Duke Heavenspan, he said, his eyelid twitching a bit. Fishing requires patience, you know. As the ancient saying goes, luck brings achievements, fate brings failure. Understand that, and it will help you remain tranquil and even-tempered. Fix heaven and earth within your heart and mind. There are countless living beings within creation, all of which are intelligent in their own way. Remember, everything is connected. If a heavenly dragonfish has sown destiny with you, it will come to you. It's how life works. Many people think that I sit here to fish, but the truth is that I am contemplating life. With a temperament like yours, you probably shouldn't waste your time here. As he spoke, he seemed to thrum with an otherworldly aura. Bai Xiaochun was taken aback by how mysterious the old man sounded, although he didn't understand anything that had just been said. However, the man looked pretty cool as a fisherman, and therefore, Bai Xiaochun nodded a few times, and then cast his line out into the heavenly pond. Upon seeing that Bai Xiaochun really was going to make an attempt at fishing, Preceptor Didnt got even more annoyed, and the contempt in his eyes grew more intense. you. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.